Welcome everyone to another Dolphin Communication Project Deep Dive webinar. Today we are joined by Lauren Rust. She is the founder and director of Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network. They are in South Carolina, where they do local dolphin monitoring, education, and stranding response. They are currently in their busy season, so we are exceptionally lucky to have Lauren's time today. And it's not going to be a super happy talk. North Atlantic right whales are really in trouble. So we're going to find out what the status is, what's going on, cut through some of the noise that people might be hearing, or maybe you've just kind of heard of this species, but you really haven't ever heard any details about them. So if you're listening live, remember to submit your questions to the chat. And if you're enjoying the recording, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Lauren.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm just gonna grab my screen here. There we go. Oh, there's my cute pup. All right. Does everything look okay?
Looks good.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Lauren Rust. And today I'm excited to talk about right whales. We do a lot of work with dolphins and other small animals, dolphins or whales. And so this is definitely something we've been working on, and sort of the voice of the right whales in South Carolina. Just a little bit of background about me. So I've been working with marine mammals for about over 20 years, both on the East Coast and West Coast. I've worked with seals and sea lions, dolphins and whales. And in 2007 to 2008, I was a right whale observer off of South Carolina. I was with the Wildlife Trust at that time. It has since moved to the Clearwater Aquarium. And then fast forward to 2017, I moved back to South Carolina and started the Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network. And we really started to sort of bridge the gap between science and researchers and the general public, something that's just missing here, kind of in all of South Carolina. I'm based in Charleston. And 2 years ago, I became the state coordinator for all marine mammal strandings in South Carolina. So any dolphin, whale, or occasional seal that strands here in South Carolina, our team is responsible for. So we are a nonprofit, and our mission is to protect marine mammals. We do it through science, monitoring, outreach, and stranding response. We do a ton of educational outreach, things like this, lots of lectures, other youth programs and outreach, dolphin monitoring programs. So there's a few sites that we actually monitor dolphins that do a behavior called strand feeding here. And so we sort of work to intercept human interactions. And then, like I said, we respond to about 50 to 60 marine mammals that strand per year. Most of those have died. And this year specifically, we've had a number of larger whales than we normally do. As I mentioned, we kind of do it all. We're a team of 4. But, we do a ton of outreach and fundraisers and other community events. So as the South Carolina permit holder, like I mentioned, we can respond anywhere from 50 to 60 marine mammals, and that can be anything from dolphins, which we cover the most of. We have a resident population here in South Carolina, but we also see, smaller whales like pygmy sperm whales or pilot whales, which is in the middle picture. And this past year, we responded to, we had a sperm whale, 42-foot sperm whale a few weeks ago. And then we also helped with the right whale that's stranded in Georgia. So we work pretty close with North Carolina and Georgia, especially on high profile cases. We sort of, we'll shift people up and down, and they'll come to us as well. And so we did help with one of the stranded, one of the stranded right whales that died last month. So just a little background about right whales if you're not familiar with them. They're, very, very large whales. They live off of the Atlantic coast. They were sort of the right whale to hunt and were hunted almost to extinction. They have a very large head. A lot of people are used to those callosities, or those patches on the top of their head. And that's actually how the animals are identified and tracked over time. So the pattern on top of the head can be unique, and especially from an aerial photograph. We'd go out, look for the animal, take photographs, and those callosities would sort of stay the same most of their life, and a way to identify the animals. They are a baleen whale. They don't have a dorsal fin, which makes them very hard to see. And then they have they're, very, very dark in color with some white patching underneath. So this is sort of their home range. So their foraging areas in the Northeast, even up into Canada, sorry. And then during the sort of between November and April, they head down to South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida to give birth. So it'll be a mix of groups. It could be pregnant females. Sometimes they're just some juveniles or a few other animals that maybe are not pregnant, but will do that migration. And they'll spend about those 6 months sort of migrating down. They're mostly giving birth, they think, off of Georgia and Florida and the warmer waters. But there's been talk about actually including South Carolina in those calving grounds. I think in the last few years, they're starting to see moms and calves off South Carolina earlier than they thought, still sort of making their way down. And so South Carolina may be included now in the calving grounds. In fact, the first calve of this season, Juno's and her calf, who I'll talk about a little bit later, she was the first calf this year, and they were spotted off of Georgetown, South Carolina, which is just north of where I live. So they'll spend a few months, about 6 months. They come down, have their calves. They're typically very, very close to shore, nursing. And then, around April, they will start to make their way back up to the Northeast. I have a little video here, which I just think it's a really good, it's a good video about right whales that I wanted to share. So I'm going to just pull it up for you.
Lauren, I'm not hearing any sound from the video now. Oh, it started, sorry.
Okay, no, that's good, thank you.
52 feet long and live 70 years or longer. North Atlantic right whales primarily live along the east coast of the United States and Canada. They feed and mate in the Northeast for most of the year. In the winter, some migrate down the coast, where pregnant females give birth in the warmer waters off the southeastern United States. They travel alone or in small groups and can be seen swimming and eating together at the surface.
As a result of whaling, the population was driven from historic numbers as high as 10 to 15,000 or more animals to the point where we are now looking at roughly only 400 North Atlantic right whales.
North Atlantic right whales are now one of the world's most endangered large whale species. While commercial whaling in the United States is no longer legal, impacts from human activities are still the greatest danger to North Atlantic right whales. North Atlantic right whales live in coastal areas with high boat traffic, so they're especially vulnerable to being struck by boats or ships.
Another principal threat to right whales is entanglement in fishing gear. The right whale drowns as a result of entanglement, or it can be a chronic event, in which case a right whale will become entangled and then suffer the effects of dragging that fishing gear around. Another threat to right whales is simply a small population size. The population can turn quickly. It can be growing and bang, the population is declining.
At least 17 North Atlantic right whales died in 2017, which was 4% of the population. While this number was unusually high, we know of at least 13 more deaths since then. These deaths could signal the beginning of the end for this species if we don't take action.
A big part of recovering North Atlantic right whales is knowing how many there are every year. We do aerial surveys as well as vessel surveys, and then we work with our partners to count and identify all the individuals as well as collect a lot of additional data on. We can see if they've become entangled. We're able to very precisely estimate how many animals are in the population.
Another tool we use is passive acoustic monitoring devices to give us an idea of where right whales might be going and habitats they might be using. We administer and support a large whale disentanglement network where volunteers and our partners attempt to disentangle right whales. Our main goal is to try and prevent entanglements in the first place. And so we're working with fishermen to modify gear, manage when and where fishery gear is placed.
NOAA Fisheries has also implemented regulations to protect right whales and reduce fatalities from vessel strikes. Everyone, whether they're on the water or in the air, including boats, kayaks, paddleboards, airplanes, or drones, must stay at least 500 yards away from any right whale. NOAA Fisheries designated North Atlantic right whales as a species in the spotlight in 2019.
Including North Atlantic right whales and the Species in the Spotlight initiative will help raise awareness with the public, increase our efforts within NOAA to work with our partners, and also aid in finding new partners to help us recover the species.
NOAA experts and partners are doing all we can to address this urgent conservation challenge. You can help too. If you see a right whale, report it through our hotlines or by using the Whale Alert app on your smartphone. By knowing where right whales are, NOAA can alert mariners so they can slow down or avoid the area. Spotting entangled whales and alerting the disentanglement network may also lead to life-saving interventions for these whales.
There's an amazing network of partners and NOAA fisheries staff hard at work to help recover the species.
With all of these people and agencies all working together, I can't help but feel we can move the needle in a substantial way to help right whales.
About that. So I think that's just a great video that sort of covers the plight of the right whale. So as you heard, they were hunted for extinction. They were considered the right whale to kill for a couple reasons. They floated after they died, which made it very easy to come back and grab them. And they're also very large and have a lot of blubber, which is why they were hunted for their oil and fat. Unfortunately now, as you can see, the death rate and the birth rate on the years over here, there are some years where, more animals are dying than they are having births. At this rate, especially I think in 2017, there was only 5 births and there were 17 deaths. In 2018, there were no births. This year, we had 18 births, but unfortunately 4 have died. They believe died. 2 have definitely died, and 2 have not been seen anymore. So are assumed have died. And so, they're just outpacing. I think they believe that we should have about 50 births per year to sort of, have this like uptick in the population growing. And to my knowledge, we've not, at least in the last, 10, 12 years, we've not even gotten near that. So, one reason that their 2 main threats are ship strikes and entanglements in fishing gear. Another reason, as I mentioned, they're, very dark in color. They swim just below the surface. They don't have a dorsal fin. They're very slow moving, and unfortunately they travel in shipping channels. So this is a video that was actually taken, it's just a quick video off South Carolina, Excuse the man's voice, but it's kind of neat because you can hear the blow, but kind of gives you an idea of how hard it may be to spot an animal if you're cruising fast. This is even on a very quiet, calm day. Other than the blow, you know, they're very hard to spot if you're going very fast. Sometimes they're just below the surface.
Oh, wow.
Now, what happened with this video, these guys, you know, they said they were out fishing, the whales popped up right next to their boat, and then they ended up posting it on social media. You know, we figured it out, and when we talked to them. So although they are, you know, you are supposed to be 500 yards away, at least, you know, based on their story, you know, it happened. They were so surprised, probably didn't realize what they were seeing, but by getting a good video, researchers were able to identify these whales. And, you know, we told them, you know, make sure you just, you know, leave the area, don't hang out. But by getting the video, they were able to identify these animals. You know, as I mentioned, long line is one of the biggest issues. There's a lot of line in the water, especially in the Northeast, where crabbing and lobster crapping is a, you know, huge industry. And there's been lots of talk and research and money into ways that they can remove line from the water. These animals are just swimming in areas where there's a ton of fishing line. There may be you know, ghost pots or just old discarded line. And so these animals get entangled, and then it's typically can be pretty fatal. Same with vessel injuries. So again, as I mentioned, they're sort of traveling very close to shore in shipping channels, both, you know, different whales, but both on the East Coast and the West Coast. Again, they're very dark and they're very low in the surface. So even if you are, you know, going the speed limit and looking for whales, they can be very hard to see. And sometimes it can be incidental, especially if you're in a very large ship. So they have done things on the West Coast where they have changed, you know, shipping lanes. I know in California, they've actually made sort of like a channel that comes in. You have the shipping lane, and it's almost just like a channel that goes out a little bit further. And that has been very helpful in allowing boats to sort of enter in kind of this one lane before they go into the shipping channel, and has reduced interactions or ship strikes with whales. On the West Coast, same thing, and I'll talk about a little bit about so vessel speed is a big issue. So the current ruling is that boats or vessels over 65 feet are required to go speed limits of 10 knots in certain areas at certain times of the year. So to slow down when, you know, the highest potential that whales will be present. So here's a perfect case study. If you haven't heard about this story, it's been in the news a lot this winter, especially so there's a new proposed rule, vessel speed rule, that was proposed a couple years ago on the East Coast to reduce vessels. So right now it's 65 feet and larger, but the proposal was to reduce the boat size down to boats that are 35 feet and larger. Sorry. So including anything from 35 feet to 65 feet. And that has been, you know, it was went up to public comment, and it's been kind of there for years now. It's been proposed by NOAA, and it's just been sort of sitting there. We've now gone through 2 calving seasons where this has not changed. So the idea is, you know, smaller boats can have an impact. They can hit whales. They do hit whales. And so why aren't we reducing the size of the vessel that should speed? Now, I will say, you know, the vessel speed, it's only certain times in certain areas for certain times of the year. And it's not a huge portion of boats from the 65 feet down. So that's, you know, if you're offshore fishermen, but a lot of your recreational fishermen are not going that far out. They're typically in closer waters. And so for example, this case study, Juno is the female, and this is one of her calves that was born. It was the first calf of this season, and it was born on, or spotted at least November 28th, 2023, just off South Carolina. I believe it was only maybe a few days to a week old. And then on January 26th, some fishermen came across Juno and her calf, and this is the calf in the picture. And we're able, again, to collect really good footage, sent it off to researchers who determined that Juno's calf had been struck by a vessel. So what you're seeing, kind of the white, there are some prop marks across the head, and then it's starting to fill in with little critters in there. The problem was, though, it was right over the blowhole, and so every time the animal was taking a breath, those abrasions and cuts were opening up and they were not healing. They thought immediately that she would not live very long, but there were sightings of her. They had traveled from South Carolina. This image was taken in South Carolina, where they determined she had been struck. They saw her down from Georgia, and they saw her into Florida. So she had been swimming. They thought she was nursing. But as time went on, unfortunately, by March 3rd, Juno's calf did succumb to her injuries and stop. And so what was interesting, though, I'm going to jump ahead, sorry. We don't have to leave it on that picture. But though, was that Juno, they determined Juno was hit by a boat. They determined between 35 feet, I think, and 57 feet. So it would have fallen in, that vessel would have fallen into the proposed vessel role. Now, we don't know if that would have made a difference. We don't know if that boat was speeding, would it have caused the same injuries? It's totally possible. But it kind of just proved the point that vessels, smaller than 65 feet do interact with animals. They can hit animals, and in this case, it did kill an animal. And so this is the rope from another animal. So I will say Juno too was a female, which, any female obviously that dies is critical to the population, to repopulating. This was another animal. This was a juvenile that washed up in, sorry, I want to say Virginia. I'm blanking right now. But it had a chronic entanglement. So they knew the animal was entangled for, I think, about a year. They were watching it. It was wrapped around a tail, and unfortunately, it eventually succumbed. So it's dragging line. Sometimes, depending if there's buoys attached, it can prevent them from diving and feeding. And so this was a 1-year-old. And again, this was a female. So what is being done? So one thing, they have really good reporting systems. So I've signed up for this, and I get emails, even though I'm not a boater, but it just kind of gives a slow, I think it calls it a slow zone to boaters or anybody that, signs up, or mariners. And so it says right whale was spotted in this area, go slow, and it sort of gives this distance of this area of where the slow zone is. Same thing with the aerial survey teams and the boat survey teams. When they do come across animals, that goes out to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard reports it to all mariners in the area that says there's a right whale at this area, go slow or avoid this area, or, change your course if you can, in a way that doesn't impact this animal. This is ropeless fishing. This is a really interesting new technology that they've been working on. This is another really quick video, but that will just kind of show us what ropeless fishing is.
There's one simple vision hack anyone can use.
Jeez. Okay, sorry about that. That did not translate as well as I hoped. But if you did get an idea of that video, basically there's these buoys that once the pots are laid down, the buoy's retractable, so there's no line in the water. And then when a boater comes back or fisherman comes back, either using GPS, they can find their pot and then they can send a signal. It will release the buoy will surface, and they can find their pots, pull them up, and go about their business. And so the idea is there's no line in the water. And so this is called ropeless fishing, and it's been a lot of science behind it and research. I mean, obviously it's very, very expensive, you know, to make all these pots, and especially for one fisherman who may have hundreds of pots would be a big expense. But this could be a really good solution. As I mentioned, the vessel, the speed reduction, this is still in the works. I think they're starting to push it a little bit harder now. Last I heard, it went to the Department of Commerce and it just had to get signed off. But I think with the recent deaths, sort of is pushing that now. So like I mentioned, now they are trying to have all vessels 35 feet and longer. The speed would be 10 knots, again, in certain areas during certain times of the year. I sort of mentioned this, but, you know, as I mentioned, Juneau's calf would fall into that vessel proposal. So, you know, other graphic that sort of talks about, you know, threats in certain areas. So obviously entanglements are a huge threat in the Northeast, where crabbing and lobster crabbing, you know, lobster fishing is a huge industry. So things like seasonal closures could be a possibility during, you know, critical times when the whales are there. On-demand fishing is sort of another term for this ropeless fishing, where your pot is sort of on demand. Sort of in their migratory path, they're dealing with ocean noise and pollution, a lot of shipping, since they're sort of traveling in those shipping channels. You're going to deal with things like oil spill, development, and all these things. So some solutions could be to reduce shipping speeds, what we talked about, optimize shipping design, and implementing seasonal closures to development, again, during certain times of the years when the whales are migrating. And then in the calving seasons, the risk of a vessel strike, you know, that sort of spans the whole area. But certainly, you know, during the calving season, they're moving slower, they're nursing, you know, they have a small calf with them, they may not be paying as much attention. You know, definitely going slower with their calf, with their side. So certainly increasing boater awareness. Things like Whale Alert is an app that you can get alerts on your boat. Seasonal speed restrictions, and certainly just increasing awareness. I know the question has come up as to, you know, all of the right whales, so everybody just knows where they are. And that's a good question. I know it's something they've explored. I think, you know, getting a tag on a large animal and staying on the animal is really, really tricky. You know, the other thing is, how do you, you know, keep that information private enough so that people don't seek out the whales? And so that can't just be publicized that, you know, here are all the right whales on the East Coast, that everybody would have access to. Mitigating that and making sure that gets out to the correct people, but that it's not being blasted out to just the general public. But something they're talking about, you know, something our crew does, we have whale necropsies, as I mentioned, they're always, for any animal that dies, especially a female, that's critical. It's really a hard thing to see. Juno's case, I think everybody was sort of rooting for that case, and unfortunately it didn't end the way we had hoped. These are just a couple articles that I've written. They're just commentaries, so opinion pieces that, but sort of putting a little bit of pressure on, what of making these changes, of just keeping it in the public, bringing awareness, to the public that these animals are critically endangered. A lot of the sightings off South Carolina have been within just a few miles. And so, making boaters aware that they're out there, that they can potentially hit them. And hopefully that's going up and down the East Coast. So just kind of lastly, a couple things that, I liked this graphic and things that you guys can do. Certainly, I think be really knowledgeable. I think there can be a lot of misinformation. It seems like there's a hot topic and then everybody jumps on it. As we see this a lot with dolphins, as soon as, anytime a dolphin dies, everybody just jumps to, humans and pollution and all these terrible things, which can happen, and they are terrible things. But, I think keeping, we try to really keep to the science and keep to, our findings. And, a lot of times animals just die from disease and, old age, for example. We just had an animal that died and he was very, very old. And so I think being knowledgeable and not just jumping to these conclusions or things that you see and read, and be knowledgeable on why they're dying, and things that you can help with. Certainly, the whale app, if you are a boater, I think those are really neat to get those alerts. Support fishermen, learning about kind of ropeless gear. There's a lot of talks and conversations and groups that going on. Report lost or missing gear. That's really important. We find a lot of gear that that have buoys on it, and we'll report it or call the fishermen. Certainly if you see an animal, the best thing to do is just back away. Like I mentioned, those videos were very helpful, but we never encourage anybody to hang out with right whales. If you do see one, just keep your distance and sort of leave the area. Certainly send an email to your elected officials if something is going on. If you feel, passionate about wanting to support that, urging them to protect, we need to keep these animals sort of in the limelight because they are at a very critical point. Only roughly 400 animals left, and they're just dying faster than they are reproducing. So raise awareness, sharing information. I think lastly, I just wanted to share this movie. If you haven't seen it, it's called Last of the Right Whales. This is a very hopeful movie. We actually streamed this when it came out. We did a film screening here in Charleston, and they did it all sort of around the country in Georgia and up in Canada. But it's a really great movie that kind of covers the plight of the right whales, but some of the research that's going on, and some of the more hopeful stories. And so I would encourage you to watch this. And that's all I have for today. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hope you're muted.
It would help if I unmuted myself before I started talking. Thank you so much. Before we get into questions, I'm just going to do our little wrap-up slides. That way we can kind of just see where the conversation goes after that. So to everyone who is watching live or the recording, if this was your first DCP webinar and you're interested in watching more, you can find them on our website. Just look under that Knowledge Hub and you'll see webinars. You can also watch them on YouTube and Vimeo. Try and make it easy for folks to find it. This was a deep dive, so Lauren didn't shy away from heavy topics and photos. A little bit longer. We also have dolphin lessons that are kind of on lighter topics, a little bit more geared toward elementary students and the young at heart. And then if you've watched them all and you want more dolphin information, you can check out our podcast, the Dolphin Pod, cleverly titled. So you can get that wherever you get your podcasts, including right on the DCP website. And then, of course, just like Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network, DCP is a nonprofit. So Lauren and I are contractually obligated to remind folks how they can support our respective organizations. So you can become a member, make a donation, you can buy swag. I know Lowcountry Marine Mammal Network has some cool stuff for purchase on their website. You can also pledge your protection or your support for the ocean by becoming a dolphin protector. That can also make a fun gift. And then you can just stay in touch, share our stories, share our posts, spread the word, and that's always, always appreciated. We have a decent amount of questions, Lauren, so we're going to see how we do. I don't know what the right order is, the icky questions or the lighthearted questions first. But that film that you put the poster up toward the end there, age appropriate? Like, is that for like families or is it more for an adult audience?
I would probably say an adult audience or maybe a teen. I mean, it definitely touches on an animal that's entangled and they sort of follow that animal. It pulls at your heartstrings for sure. I wouldn't say it's lighthearted. But they do it in a very kind of hopeful way. I think they wrap it up really nicely. Probably not for young kids though, just because it does show the entanglements. I do think there is an animal that you talk about that dies in strands, but sort of has a hopeful message at the end.
Message. Okay, thank you. Part of why I wanted to segue with that is one of our listeners is a 5th grade teacher, and she has already introduced her class to North Atlantic right whales. They adopted one and spent the year learning about them. She's wondering if you have any other recommendations for resources for that age group.
Kind of putting this together. I mean, NOAA has a lot of really great content, I think. Videos, I showed you that one video. That would probably be my, Clearwater Aquarium. They're the permit holder for all the right whale aerial surveys. And so they, I follow them as far as like keeping up with right whale sightings, information. Sorry. But I would go to NOAA probably for some of their more in-depth information.
That's good. Thank you. The callosities, oh, we can wait for her to come back.
Thank you.
I know what it's like to be interrupted in the middle of a Zoom.
I'm listening, sorry.
That's okay. We are real humans. We are not robots. So the callosities that you're able to recognize individuals by, what age do those become stable enough for that?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the answer for that. I don't want to guess on that. Yeah, I can't answer that for you. Sorry.
That's okay. Always still learning. Then this one, I don't know if you'll have the answer to either. Someone asked about that 2018 with no births, and I would assume that it's like no successful births. Do scientists have any idea why that was such like an extreme non-reproductive year?
So I actually believe that year there were no reported births. which was really crazy. You know, I don't remember exactly, and I don't know the exact answer. But I can tell you that whales can go through very long periods of where they won't have calves. And a lot of these females, and a lot of that is due to sort of just stress. So lack of food, you know, stress in their home range, sometimes pulling entanglements. And so they can often go where they could have a calf, you know, biologically, maybe every couple of years or few years, they are sometimes going 10 to 15 years spaced between their next calf. So part of the reason that the population is also so small, I think there's about 100 breeding females, and when you're, you know, they're not all breeding every year. And then when you're spacing it out that long, I think there's just probably some cyclical years where just so many, you know, maybe they've all had them at different times and they're all sort of catching up and all taking sort of this spacer. But unfortunately, it's not normal to take that long between their calves. And so that's part of the reason that they're not the rate is not increasing. And I, you know, I don't know exactly on that year, but I'm going to guess it's stressors, which sort of drives this long space between their calving cycles.
And the flip where that first question we got was about the 0 births in 2018. Another listener is wondering if anybody knows why 2017 was such a productive birthing year. Yeah, I mean, still nowhere near. I think you said the goal would be 50 births a year.
Yeah.
But
No,
maybe you answered that, and it's just the timing of the females.
that's what I think. I think it's just the timing, you know, obviously, you know, food and pressures, things like that are going to make, you know, but I think they're just probably years where more of them are giving birth because there's those cycles, and then years where a lot of them. So those are, yeah, they always report any birth. So this year it will be reported as 18 births, and then however many deaths are deaths. So when it says 0, it's true 0. And when it says 29, you know, 29 animals were born, that doesn't mean they all lived.
Yeah. A couple of questions, I'm gonna kind of lump them, because we got a couple different questions that had to do with the regulations for boaters. So one, the 10 knot rule, the speed limit rule, and whatever seasons that's in. You mentioned that there's a push to get that expanded to all the way down to boats that are just 35 feet long. Do you feel that the 10 knot limit is like behaviorally appropriate for the North Atlantic right whales? Is that a good speed?
Yeah, so this is based on a ton of research, you know, about the impact that a boat going at 10 knots versus 20 knots, you know, the impact and the injury that it can cause. And so, you know, kind of basing it on, you know, I'm definitely basing that on science and research. And those were NOAA's recommendations that, you know, going at 10 knots would have less of an impact, and that the animal could potentially survive that impact. So that's sort of why it's down to the 10 knots. You know, you're also, it's also easier to see when you're at 10 knots, you know, versus going much faster. You have a greater chance of, you know, seeing something or transitioning or slowing down or moving your boat when you're moving at a slower pace. So I do agree with that. And then, you know, again, we did a lot of research too, just even locally, how many boats is that going to impact? Because I know there's definitely concern from fishermen, you know, that it's going to impact, you know, how fast they can get to and from, you know, their fishing grounds. And is that going to delay their time or cause their business a lot of money? And like I said, you know, at least based in South Carolina, we looked at it and it was not a huge number of boaters. And on the other side, you know, most times if a boat, and there's a very classic story down in Florida of a boat hitting a right whale, and it was a huge fishing charter boat, and it sunk, and it was millions of dollars, this boat that sunk because of the damage the boat can sustain. So people don't always think about that. If you hit a right whale, chances are you've really impacted your boat as well.
Like hitting a moose up in the Northeast or
Right.
Alaska. No one wants to have those types of interactions. Along those lines of kind of making appropriate legislation, rules, restrictions, recommendations, wherever it is on that spectrum, but making ones that actually make sense for the animal. Where is there, when they're along the East Coast, do they have most common water depth that they swim in when they're making that migration? And then are there fishing restrictions that could be made with that depth in mind? So someone is wondering, for example, if they're swimming greater than 50 feet, could a rule prohibit lobster or crab pots in that depth?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I think that's hard because I think they cover a range of depths. I mean, here in South Carolina, for example, we know they're coming within a mile a mile from shore, and even closer in a lot of other states. So as you go to North Carolina, even northern South Carolina, they're just offshore. And so that would just cover a lot of ground. I think that would impact a lot more fishermen. And so, I would want to see a rule that protects the whales, but is also sustainable and that people are going to follow. And so I think you would really have to cover from the coast, out to deep water, and that would cover everything, right? A lot of area.
Yeah.
Same with the lobsters. And so I think it's I don't think there's a good answer. I think that's why there's no good solutions right now. They do, they've talked about closing, and I think actually, lobster fishermen's, I've heard this, they will sometimes support things like closing. So if there's like a lot of whales in a certain area, say in a lobster fishing area, they will close down the lobster industry for a period of time. But the lobster fishermen were like, it's a huge impact if we entangle a whale, we don't want to do that. And that has a huge impact on their industry. And so they will support that in ways. So they are supportive of things. I think it's finding a balance that we haven't found yet. So things like maybe the ropeless fishing could be useful, where it sort of supports both sides. That's a good question.
In regard to the kind of the improperly discarded lines and the ghost pots and things, somebody asked this directly to me, but I don't know if we know the answer. They were wondering how long, in like years or decades, does discarded rope stay a risk? So I'm thinking of that like when you're a kid and you learn how long it takes for different products that you're throwing away to decompose. Are these discarded lines and ropes and things a risk for a year and then they sink? Are they a risk for a decade? Are they out there for 100 years? Do you have any sense of how long that stays a risk?
I mean, I would say years and years and years. I think it depends so there's a couple of factors, what the rope is made out of. So, a rope, they're transitioning to a lot of nylon ropes, which will last a lot longer, was the point I was trying to make. But people tend to think they sink, and some do. We did a crab pot study here in Charleston because we have a high rate of crab pot entanglements with dolphins. And the theory was, the line sinks. There's a lot of excess line. It sinks to the bottom. What's the problem? There's one line to a crab pot. Well, we did a study where we went underwater and that line is just swirling and swirling in the water column. And so it wasn't sinking like people thought of. And I suspect in some areas when you have turbulence and currents, that these, some of the pots are moving. A lot of them have buoys attached to them. And so they're definitely still a threat because there's a line, there's a buoy, and it's not at the bottom. And so that's a huge threat that's just in the water column. It's not being regulated. No one's checking on it. And so there are certainly probably ones that make it to the bottom of the ocean and they sink.
Mhm.
But I do think it's a long-term issue. And one thing they do, I know in the Northeast, which we've talked about here in South Carolina, is by doing a seasonal closure, they require everybody to pull their pots out for, a couple weeks, I think. And if anything is still in the water, it's collected and it's taken. They assume that it's, a discarded pot or a lost pot. And so everything is collected, but everything's clear, except for the ones obviously you can't see underwater. But I think that's a good solution because here we just have pots, they're not regulated or it's illegal or it's a ghost pot. And, the DNR, for example, doesn't know necessarily if anyone's checking on them. So I think that's a good solution.
Yeah. Thank you. And also thank you in the talk. This is just my own comment. Thank you for bringing up the complexity of why don't we just tag them all? That way we know where they all are at any given time, because I've also kind of heard that whispered here and there, and it really is there. Part of it maybe is part of the bigger solution, but you run into problems when everybody can just go find the wildlife, and then they don't have time to do what they need to do and recover and whatnot. Someone else just added that, in addition, like you were talking about, a boater not wanting to hit a right whale, an animal that big, and take damage to their boat, that most boaters, fishers, grabbers don't want to get their own boat entangled in lost line either. So it seems like some of those solutions might be win-wins for the recreational boaters, commercial fishers, and the whales.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. We really appreciate your time, the information, the visual assistance, and thank you for taking the time to stick around for questions. We hope that everyone enjoyed this deep dive. A right whale is not a dolphin, but we think that they are worth paying attention to and worth figuring out what each of us can do to maybe help, because it seems like we're running out of time.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you again, Lauren, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again at another deep dive. Bye.
Thank you.